Malaysia Airlines Flight
MH370.
Flight MH370
disappeared.
Imagine this. A massive Boeing 777, packed with 239 souls, lifts off into the night sky, and then, in a heartbeat, vanishes forever. No distress call, no wreckage, just silence. But what if the truth isn't a tragic accident, but a web of lies, hidden clues, and shocking cover-ups that defy explanation? From the final good night that echoed into oblivion, to radar ghosts flying the wrong way, silent satellite pings screaming for answers, and theories of suicidal pilots, terrorists, or a ghost plane hurtling toward doom. Today, we unravel the 7 strangest enigmas of Flight MH370, exposing why the deadliest cover-up in aviation history might be burying the real story. Stick around, because by the end, you'll question everything you thought you knew. Just before we dive in, make sure to hit that like button and subscribe to show your support for our community. 8th March 2014, 12:42 a.m. Malaysian Airlines Flight MH370 departs from Kuala Lumpur Airport. Its destination is Beijing. There are 227 passengers on board this aircraft. 10 cabin crew members are present, along with 2 pilots in command. In the left seat sits Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah. He is 53 years old and ranks among the most senior and experienced captains at Malaysian Airlines. In the right seat is First Officer Fariq Abdul Hamid, aged 27. For him, this journey serves as a training flight. Once it is finished, he will receive full certification as a pilot. The aircraft continues normally for the first 20 minutes. Then, at 1:08 a.m., it passes beyond the Malaysian coastline and enters the South China Sea, heading toward Vietnam. Captain Zaharie informs air traffic control that the plane is maintaining 35,000 feet. All systems appear normal. 11 minutes later, the flight enters Vietnamese airspace. Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control therefore transmits over the radio. Malaysian 370, contact Ho Chi Minh 120.9. Good night. Captain Zaharie replies calmly. Good night, Malaysian 370. The words sound completely routine. Up to this moment, nothing seems unusual. Yet those final words from Captain Zaharie become the very last communication ever received from the aircraft. From that point onward, no further signal or sign of Flight MH370 is ever detected. The plane simply vanishes without explanation. This disappearance of Malaysian Airlines Flight MH370 turns into the greatest unsolved mystery in modern aviation history. Just 30 seconds after entering Vietnamese airspace, the aircraft vanishes completely from radar screens. The time is 1:21 a.m. Kuala Lumpur Air Traffic Control does not notice the disappearance right away. When they eventually realize it, they assume the plane has simply moved out of their radar coverage and into Vietnamese responsibility. So it seems like nothing unusual has happened. Meanwhile, the Vietnamese air traffic controllers observe that MH370 has crossed into their airspace. But then it suddenly drops off their radar too. They make repeated attempts to contact the flight by radio. There is no reply from the cockpit. After 18 minutes of unsuccessful tries, the Vietnamese controllers inform Kuala Lumpur that MH370 has mysteriously vanished. In a case like this, the Kuala Lumpur Aeronautical Rescue Coordination Center is supposed to be alerted within 1 hour that an aircraft is missing. However, it actually takes 4 full hours before any emergency procedures begin. The time is now 6:32 a.m. That was exactly when the plane was scheduled to arrive and land in Beijing, but no landing occurs. An immediate search and rescue operation is launched. Efforts focus on locating the aircraft. Looking at the route map, the flight was heading from Malaysia toward Beijing, passing over the South China Sea and near Vietnam. So the initial search naturally concentrates in the South China Sea area. This becomes a large international operation. The next morning, 34 ships and 28 aircraft from 7 different countries joined the effort to find any trace of the plane. Yet nothing is discovered, no wreckage, no signals, no signs at all. Roughly 4 days later, on March 12th, new information emerges. Although the plane had disappeared from civilian radar, a military radar had actually picked it up that same night. Surprisingly, according to this military radar data, the last sighting of the aircraft occurred at 2:22 a.m., and its position was nowhere near the South China Sea. Instead, it was close to the Andaman and Nicobar Islands, west of Malaysia, right along the Strait of Malacca. Even more shocking, the military radar showed the plane flying in the direction of the Andaman Islands, completely the opposite way from Beijing. When this information becomes public, it stuns everyone. Where exactly had the plane gone? Had it continued westward toward India and perhaps crashed somewhere in the Himalayas or even Kazakhstan? A few days later, another piece of evidence appears: satellite data. Investigators learned that the aircraft was automatically attempting to connect with a satellite. This is completely normal behavior. Large commercial jets like the Boeing 777 regularly send these handshake signals to satellites to keep communication channels open, much like how a smartphone automatically searches for and connects to familiar Wi-Fi networks. The issue, however, is that during these satellite contacts, the plane was only performing a login attempt. It was trying to establish a link, but no actual data, such as the aircraft's position, was ever sent. The satellite could only detect that the aircraft was attempting to send a signal to it. It had no other information about the plane's actual position. However, some scientists and investigators came up with an idea. Perhaps this signal attempt itself could help narrow down where the plane might be. They reasoned that whenever the satellite picked up the communication attempt, it would have adjusted its antenna to point toward the source, the aircraft. So they studied the precise angle of the satellite's antenna at those moments and performed detailed calculations to figure out possible locations. As mentioned before, satellite data like this cannot pinpoint an exact spot. What it can do is define a large circular arc where the plane was most likely located at the time of each handshake. The aircraft could have been anywhere along that white circle when it tried to connect. The plane made 7 separate attempts to communicate with the satellite. That is why 7 different white circles appear on the maps. These events are known as satellite handshakes. Each circle is labeled with the exact time of the attempt. The 7th and final circle represents the last known handshake, the most recent moment the plane reached out to the satellite. This marks the furthest point investigators could confirm the aircraft had reached. What shocked everyone was the enormous size of this final circle. It stretched across a vast region, from parts of Kazakhstan all the way to China, then down through Indonesia and even toward Australia, spanning huge stretches of open ocean. In that last circle, the plane could theoretically have been almost anywhere, or possibly even farther along its path. This was the final confirmed contact. Afterward, investigators carried out additional analysis. They factored in the aircraft's cruising speed and the amount of fuel remaining on board. Using those details, they narrowed the possibilities to a specific portion of the final circle, an arc-shaped zone now famously called the 7th Arc. This 7th Arc lies roughly 2,000 kilometers west of Australia and covers an extremely wide expanse of remote southern Indian Ocean, an area where very little exploration had ever taken place. On the maps, you can see how the satellite data was used to estimate the plane's path. The outermost yellow dotted line shows the maximum distance the aircraft could have flown given its remaining fuel, equivalent to about 7 hours of flight time. The red curved line marks the 7th Arc, the zone where experts believe the plane most likely ended its journey and crashed. Following this conclusion, multiple large-scale search operations were launched. The yellow-shaded zones on the map indicate areas that were actively searched. The orange section highlights the highest priority search zone, where the greatest effort was concentrated. By April 2014, all aerial searches over the ocean surface were called off. They had become pointless, If the aircraft had gone down, it would have sunk beneath the waves almost immediately. There would be no floating debris left on the surface for search teams to spot. That is exactly why a deep-sea search became necessary. At that stage, the largest and most costly search mission in aviation history was launched. For weeks, then months, and eventually years, teams kept looking for any trace of the missing plane. Yet nothing turned up. 3 years passed, and after an expenditure of $160 million, the authorities finally called off the entire operation. It was officially declared a failure. However, there was one piece of positive news. In July 2015, the first fragment from the aircraft washed up on land. A piece of debris arrived on the shores of Réunion Island, located to the east of Madagascar. What was found there was the plane's flaperon, a control surface from the wing. In the photograph, you can clearly see this damaged component belonging to the aircraft. Later, in 2018, an American firm called Ocean Infinity reached an agreement with the Malaysian government. They proposed a new search effort with a no-find, no-fee arrangement. If the plane was not located, they would charge nothing, no payment at all. On that basis, they began another attempt. Ocean Infinity deployed highly sophisticated underwater drones and scanning equipment. During their operation, they were also creating detailed maps of the seabed. The search focused precisely on the region along the 7th arc. The ocean floor in that area contains numerous underwater volcanoes, steep cliffs, and rugged mountain-like formations. They continued searching for several months, but sadly, this mission also came up empty. No wreckage or signs of the aircraft were discovered. At the same time, Malaysian police opened a separate third investigation. They decided to examine the backgrounds of everyone on board, the passengers as well as the pilots. They looked into personal histories, travel records, and any possible motives. Was there any indication that someone might have attempted to hijack the flight? After carrying out these thorough checks, various theories began to surface. What really might have happened to MH370? Let's go through the main ideas one by one. The initial question was, how could the plane have vanished so completely from radar? One possibility was some kind of electrical malfunction, an onboard accident, or a serious technical breakdown that caused all communication and tracking systems to fail. Another explanation was that someone, either a passenger or one of the pilots, intentionally turned off the transponder. This would have been a deliberate act. The first major theory pointed directly at Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah. People suggested that the captain had purposefully shut down all communications and then deliberately directed the aircraft into the ocean. But what could have driven him to do such a thing? Certain claims argued that he was not in a stable mental state. Others insisted he was suffering from severe depression and intended to take his own life. Still others proposed that the whole event was actually a hijacking, perhaps carried out as an act of terrorism. But why exactly is Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah being singled out and blamed? There are several points that people use to support this theory. The first argument concerns the sharp 180-degree turn the plane made, reversing from the direction of Vietnam back toward Malaysia. Supporters say the autopilot alone could not have performed such a deliberate maneuver. It had to have been programmed or manually set on purpose. The second point is that the aircraft was flown right along the border between Thai and Malaysian airspace. They claim this route was chosen intentionally so the plane could slip between the two countries' radar coverage without being easily tracked by either side. The third piece of evidence is particularly striking. Captain Zaharie had a home flight simulator, which was not at all unusual for an experienced pilot. However, investigators discovered that he had once entered and saved a flight path in the simulator during a practice session. By coincidence, that simulated route closely matched the actual path MH370 is believed to have followed after it turned back. At first glance, this seems like strong proof that he planned it all ahead of time. Yet the official who led the search investigation has firmly rejected this entire theory. He stated clearly that it simply does not hold up. There are strong counterarguments in defense of the captain. First, he was widely regarded as a highly skilled, professional, and respected senior pilot. Everyone who knew him spoke highly of his character. He had no reported family troubles, no financial difficulties, and no history of unusual or troubling behavior. There was simply no clear motive or warning sign that would suggest he might deliberately harm himself or others. If a pilot truly intended to commit suicide by crashing a full passenger jet, experts say there would almost always be some prior indications in their personal life or actions, but none were found here. Because of these doubts, attention turned to a second major theory, that unknown hijackers or terrorists on board carried out the act. When this idea gained traction, suspicion quickly fell on two specific passengers. The first was Pouria Noor Mohammed Merdad, and the second was Delavar Sayed Mohammed Reza. Both were Iranian nationals. What raised red flags was that they were traveling using stolen passports, one Italian and one Austrian. Both passports had been reported stolen earlier in Thailand. Investigators initially believed the two men might have been trying to reach Europe illegally. Their plan appeared to be fly first to Beijing, then continue onward to Europe. Further checks revealed that one of them had a mother living in Hamburg, Germany, who was expecting her son to arrive. In the end, however, the terrorism theory was officially dismissed. Apart from the use of the stolen passports, no other evidence emerged to suggest they were involved in any terrorist plot or intended to harm the flight. It turned out they were most likely just two individuals attempting to migrate to Europe by using forged documents. Interpol later confirmed this assessment, stating that the men were probably not terrorists at all. This leads us to the third theory, which many consider the most likely explanation. According to this idea, everyone on board MH370, passengers and crew alike, lost consciousness because of a sudden lack of oxygen. That included both pilots, Captain Zaharie Ahmad Shah and his co-pilot First Officer Farik Abdul Hamid. The entire aircraft essentially became a ghost plane with no one awake at the controls while the autopilot continued flying the route. There may have been some issues or glitches in how the autopilot was functioning, but basically it kept the plane airborne until the fuel tanks ran completely dry. Once the engines flamed out from fuel exhaustion, the aircraft gradually descended and eventually crashed into the ocean. How exactly could such an oxygen failure have happened? Several possibilities have been suggested. Some believe an electrical fire broke out in the cockpit, causing critical systems, including the transponder, to fail or shut down. Others think a structural accident or pressurization problem led to the rapid loss of cabin oxygen. A few even propose that hijackers deliberately caused the oxygen depletion. Let's look at one realistic scenario often used to explain this theory. In this example, shortly after the plane entered Vietnamese airspace, the pilots detected a serious problem. Something was malfunctioning on board. To return to the nearest suitable airport, the captain immediately turned the aircraft 180 degrees back toward Malaysia. As the plane headed home, a catastrophic event occurred, resulting in a sudden depressurization or oxygen shortage throughout the cabin. Within minutes, every person on the aircraft, pilots and passengers, passed out from hypoxia. Because of the oxygen loss, numerous onboard systems stopped working properly. Yet the autopilot remained engaged and continued guiding the plane along its programmed path. Later, military radar tracked the aircraft as it flew on. At some point, the autopilot, or perhaps a preset course, made another turn, this time southward. The plane kept flying steadily deeper into the southern Indian Ocean until, finally, it ran out of fuel and glided down to crash into the sea, roughly 2,000 kilometers west of Australia. In the early days after the disappearance, many other wild theories circulated about what might have happened to MH370. Some claimed aliens had abducted the plane. Others insisted the U.S. military had shot it down and was covering it up. There were stories that Russian President Putin knew exactly where it was hidden. A few even suggested a brand new version of the Bermuda Triangle had appeared in that part of the ocean. All sorts of far-fetched ideas surfaced, but clearly most of these explanations are highly unlikely and lack any real supporting evidence. So after the radar ghosts, silent pings, ghost flights, and every theory we've dissected, the southern Indian Ocean still guards its secret. Nearly 12 years on, Ocean Infinity is back out there, scanning the seventh arc with next-gen tech. One find could change everything: wreckage, black boxes, or proof of the unthinkable. The real mystery isn't just where MH370 vanished, it's why the truth stays hidden. Incompetence, tragedy, or deliberate cover-up? Tell me in the comments, what do you think really happened? Pilot suicide? Hypoxia ghost plane? Something darker?